in terms of like what to do first when it's time to actually make a record, well, you need to decide on the key. You need to decide on some tempo. They're not absolutes because as you get into actually recording, they can change. They might change a little bit from what you thought, but sort of starting to make those decisions early are good because at least you feel more resolved. If I'm curious about the key of a song and not feeling comfortable, and we try and move it around, and it doesn't necessarily make it feel better, well then that's okay. It's just maybe there's something else that needs to happen, but I feel resolved that like if we're in the key of D and then we try C and E and it doesn't improve it, or they sound worse, well it's like, okay, well I feel good about the original key, and maybe it's something else that needs to happen. Maybe it's the rhythm, or maybe the song that was written on piano, maybe we should consider moving it to a different primary instrument. Just before we get to the recording phase, I just want to make sure that we have spent a little bit of time considering the structure of things, the transition, because the recording phase is when you figure out arrangement and instrumentation. And it'll be a lot easier if you have done your homework with the structure, the transitions, the length of the song. Those are important considerations. Like what is your avenues of making it accessible to people, sharing it with people. You have to consider what the parameters are of things like Spotify or the radio, or the length of a CD, or are you putting it on a 7-inch? Just there's more to consider than just what you think feels good, depending on where you want to go. Once you kind of got those things in order and ready to go to the studio and record, and the studio being the recording environment doesn't necessarily have to mean you go to a commercial studio. The things to do early are get a good working vocal, get a good. I firmly believe in recording the vocal early and often through the process. At a certain point, you might get it the first try and it feel great, and you'll be living with it as you're building the song and the recording. And if it's great, it'll survive all the way to the end. It will be really helpful in forming the whole recording process. But then you'll also know if what's not working about it, and you can address it, or you can re-sing the whole thing more than once, But it's good to do it early because it helps build the relationship and foundation of the song. The rhythm section is really important. It's really important to work out what the basic rhythms of the song are doing. Doesn't necessarily have to be a drum kit, but get that early. I also firmly believe in that you should get what the bass instrument is doing. Get that involved very early. Don't leave that till later. Don't relegate that instrument to just holding down the low end and playing the roots and overly simple. Now, sometimes that's appropriate, and I'm not saying that the goal should be to have busy or overly melodic bass. I'm just saying that it can be a very important instrument and area to add a lot of movement and rhythm and color and texture to a composition and a record. So the basic rhythms, what the bass, whatever's taking care of the bottom end, what it's doing, the voice, and whatever the primary instrument is. Like for some artists and some projects, the vocalist and the person that is singing the top line melodies, they don't play an instrument, and so the primary instrument is not so identifiable with the artist, and it's really left up for interpretation. But if you're working with a singer-songwriter that writes on acoustic guitar, Well, the acoustic guitar may not be in the final composition, but it definitely should be part of the early picture, in at least getting the job, or getting the early recording of the song down. I mean, the Beatles, they had very interesting, like once they got past their first few records where they sort of switched away from being a live band, performing band, and they were just turned into a studio band, record making band, they still went in and started their songs as that basic little rock band. They would bring a song in and they'd show everybody on acoustic guitar or piano or whatever, and that's where they wrote the song, and that's how they would demonstrate the song to everybody else. And then they might, quite often they would go about recording the basic version of the song as the little rock band, and then they had sort of a document of what the idea was and what the rhythm was and how everybody was kind of participating. And then sometimes often, not sometimes, later they would, this is sort of the middle of their career, because when you get to Let It Be, that's when they kind of got back to being the rock band a bit more that they started out being. But sort of like Strawberry Fields or Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Band, or they would record as a little rock band, and then they would add all this instrumentation on top of it, and they would take away the primary stuff, and then suddenly the music became very interesting and would have all these cool dimensions. So all that to say that whatever maybe the primary instrument is of the writer and artist, get that in there too, because that will be the thing that informs some of the other decisions and some of the things that would be put in the song. And then sometimes you can strip it away. Even like in hip hop music, what has been common is that a musical segment will be sampled and looped from a record, and then they'll start programming to it. They'll play some of the rhythm that's in the thing that has been lifted and sampled, and they'll add instrumentation to it, and then they'll turn off that original thing, and then suddenly it's derived a feeling from what was there before, but because it's just additive, it's not doing everything, and then you take the original thing away, suddenly you have this cool piece of music that has been informed by something else, something borrowed, something familiar, but then you've put on all these different sounds, electronic drums and snippets and samples from other things, and maybe a new live bass part has been put over top of it. There's all kinds of interesting ways to create and build. And making a record is a journey, and sometimes it can go quickly. Sometimes you know exactly what you want to do, but new artists are trying to define and understand and find a sound that puts them in a place. So that's a bit of a journey and a discovery experimental process. And then established artists also are looking to change things up and challenge the idea of who they are and what their output is, and show that they're more than just one particular thing that they've been in the past.